Hello again. One of the most popular subjects on these podcasts relate to wildlife photography. So generally when I'm talking about the things you need to think about if you want to do some wildlife photography. So I thought I'd revisit that. Probably a lot of this stuff I'll have said before, but I find with this kind of thing that when you start to hear it 2, 3, maybe 4 times, you'll tend to pick up different things each time you hear it. So here we go. And there's probably some new things in there as well that I may or may not have mentioned before, or you may not have heard me mention anyway. So I'm hoping this will be of value to you. Now, for most of us, and I do include myself in this because I don't travel that often at the moment, and I am planning a trip to Southern Africa just at the moment. So these kind of questions are quite pertinent. But for most of us, we're not heading out and seeing wildlife or animals every day. Obviously, if you live in an area where there are a lot of animals and that's your thing, then great. You've got a lot of opportunity to practice and get things right. But if you're going somewhere to see a specific type of animal and it isn't in your kind of usual neighborhood, then it's all the more important that you pay attention to the planning, because if you get something wrong at the planning stage, that can have a big impact on the results that you come back with, and it could potentially ruin the whole trip for you, or you might feel that way if you don't get the kind of photographs you're hoping for. So I'm going to dive into a few questions that are kind of, I guess, high-level questions, and then drop into a little bit of detail. And hopefully in there, there'll be something of value to you. So the first question is, which animals will you be photographing? Which species are you hoping to see? And that, I would imagine, is pretty much top of the list for most people anyway, because that would be why you're going, if you are keen to photograph certain animals. So having identified what it is that you want to photograph, what are the sort of habitats that you will be working in? So where will you find these animals? Are they out at sea? Are you in a forest? Are you in a desert? What kind of environment? Is it woodland? And obviously all of this has a bit of a bearing, well, quite a large bearing actually, on certainly the sort of lighting that you're going to have to cope with, the lighting conditions. So that will drive to some extent the lens that you're using. Now, I'm going to talk more about lenses than I am the camera body itself, because I'm going to assume that you are not planning to buy a new camera body, be it DSLR or mirrorless, to do this trip. There are other podcasts where I talk about things to think about when you are going to buy a new camera body. So for this one, it's more a question of what do you need to get the kind of images that you want to come home with. And that will relate much more to the lens you're using than the camera body itself. I'm going to assume you've got a camera body that is reasonably good. So you've got the habitats that you will be shooting in. You've also got the habits of the animals. So, and what sort of behaviors do you want to capture? Are you looking at animals that will be grazing and not doing very much? So maybe zebra or antelope or something like that, where they tend to be grazing a lot of the time. They might run occasionally, particularly if there's a predator about, then obviously they will run, but occasionally they'll just have a little jog around. So what are the behaviors you're hoping to see? Obviously, if you are photographing a predator, then the kind of money shot, I suppose, that people love to get is a predator chasing down prey, because you will see it if you're lucky, but these kind of things, you just got to be in the right place at the right time. So there is a reasonable amount of luck. And also, though, if you have a guide, and I always recommend getting a local guide if you can, wherever you're going, because they will understand a lot more about the behaviors of the animals in that area and those particular animals, and the sort of times of day they're likely to be active, when they're not active, where you need to go to catch these sort of things. So having a good guide is really important and is a really big help if you are hoping to get that kind of, action shot, let's say, for the sake of it. So specific behaviors. Are the animals easy to find? So that's another thing to think about. Are they active at particular times of day, times of year? if you are looking for a migration activity, then you really need to understand when that migration is happening and where you need to be to see it. So an example I often give, because it was one that I lived with for a while, was the humpback whale migration, and taking photographs of humpback whales off the coast of Sydney in Eastern Australia. So humpback whales spend the summer months down in Antarctica. Here I'm talking southern summer, so around Christmas time. And they then spend the winter months up off the coast of Queensland, and that's where they mate and give birth. So obviously there's a journey to the north initially, and then they come back again later in the year to head back down to Antarctica for the summer when it arrives. So you just got to be aware of what that whale watching season is at that location. So you might be thinking of going somewhere else. So there are humpback whales in different parts of the world, different populations. So you just need to check out when are you likely to see them, and make sure you're there at the right time. So all of this stuff hopefully is pretty obvious, but I do know people who just forget kind of basics, and that can lead to quite a frustrating trip. So other animals will be there all year round, so that's not so much of a problem. Time of day is important though. So for example, if you are intending to photograph birds, they tend to be more active in the morning when they're feeding. If you are looking at reptiles, then they are obviously cold-blooded, so they need a bit of warmth from somewhere to get going. So you'll tend to see them being more active later in the day. I've often seen snakes just lying on tarmac just to warm up. Sometimes they get too hot. So I've seen crocodiles at the banks of a river with their mouth open, and that means they're not yawning. They just sit there with their mouth open. It's a way of cooling off. So they're getting too warm, and that's when you might see them go into the river just to cool off, or whatever body of water they're around. Mammals, it will depend on the species, but mammals are active 24 hours a day. Different species are active at different times. So what behaviours are you looking for? The mammals that you're thinking of or you're hoping to photograph, when are they most active? And obviously time of day also points to lighting, things like contrast. So taking photographs in the middle of the day is not ideal, really, because you tend to you don't get that many shadows if the sun's overhead, but they can be quite harsh. So you get quite a high contrast between the bright areas and the dark areas of your image. So it means getting the exposure right can be a bit tricky. You've really got to expose correctly, and then you might need to do some work in post to get the post-processing to just get the sort of contrast that you really want for that image. It's nicer, or I prefer photographing earlier in the day or later in the day, and particularly that golden hour, that hour immediately after sunrise, and then that hour before sunset, when you start to get these orange colours. And certainly if you're out early in the morning and you get mist, and that's combined with that sort of golden hour colour, that can look pretty amazing. So, have a think about the time of day and the sort of things you need to think about when you shoot at different times of day. Weather conditions can have a bearing as well. Obviously, it might be that where you are, it's not that sunny. You might have to deal with a lot of rain or a lot of cloud cover. Cloud gives a fairly even lighting, and that also can be quite good because you don't get the shadows around the eyes. If you're doing close-up shots, you don't have animals sort of squinting. I mean, it's true photographing people as well, but more even lighting is actually much better. So these are the kind of things you need to start thinking about, and that will give you some idea of the kind of photographs you're likely to come back with, what's likely for you to be able to shoot. Another thing about behaviours is, what are the animals doing when you're photographing? Are they fairly mobile? Are they moving around a lot? So in Namibia, for example, I was photographing elephants, but they would tend to be walking, sort of moving through their area during the day. So if we didn't see them in the morning, they might be coming through later in the day, or they may have already gone past. So you need someone who can track, particularly if the animals have quite a large range and they could be anywhere within 50 k's of where you are. So you need to have that knowledge. Again, the normal sort of go-to, or the thing to think about, is where are they getting their food? Do they drink? Do you need to be near a water hole? Do they get their food from a wider area? So, for example, when I was in Botswana, water holes would normally be a good place to see wildlife. But when I was there had been a lot of rain in the preceding weeks, and everything was very green and lush. And what that meant was that the animals had dispersed. They didn't need to go to water holes to get food and to get water. They could get it just wandering about. Now, that's safer for them, animals that are preyed on by other animals, because obviously prey animals, predators will go where their prey are located. And when there's not that much water around, you're going to find them near water holes, because obviously they'll be staking those out and, looking for a prey animal to turn up. If you're in a situation where the animals are quite widely dispersed, then your chances of seeing a predator are that much more reduced, unless you've got someone with no local knowledge that will come in handy. So these just kind of things to think about. Some things you can control, some things you can't. And the thing with wildlife photography is a lot of it you can't control. So you just need to be adaptable to the conditions and the circumstances that you find yourself in. Okay, so that's the first lot of questions really relating directly to the animals. The other thing I want to talk about is more the photographs themselves. So what are the photographs that you want to come back with? Are there particular photographs that have inspired you and that you would really love to be able to shoot yourself? Now, so this comes back to the type of photograph, the sort of composition that you're looking at. Are you looking at a close-up? Are you looking at more of a kind of broader shot that shows the animal in its context, in its environment? Are you, as I've already mentioned, are you looking for particular behaviours? So generally, if you're looking for particular behaviours, you may well have to make multiple trips, do multiple shoots in order to get what you're looking for. So one of the pictures I used to love getting was humpback whale breaching. That was always great to see. But then going beyond that, I would ideally want to have something in the background. So one example of that was to have the skyline of Sydney in the background, just to make the point that these amazing animals are going past a very large population centre in Australia. So that puts them in context. And it also starts coming back to story. So another thing to think about is the story. What is it that you want to share with the person who looks at the photograph? Is it more of an arty shot? So the picture I was talking about earlier, where you've got a lot of early morning mist, that golden light, that could be much more of a kind of arty shot that somebody would want to have on their wall, for example, just very atmospheric. Is it more of a documentary type shot? Are you documenting behavior? Are you doing animal species identification or individual identification? Because a lot of animals, so tigers, for example, have a unique stripe pattern on their face, and that's how the adults are identified individually. If you go to places like Kana, for example, in India, they have in the park information, they have a list of the names of the individual adults and a picture of the face to give an idea of just how their patterns are on each individual. So if you're doing a population count, that kind of thing, which they do in some reserves, then they might do that photographically by photographing the face of the individual animal and maybe flanks. So in the example of kudus, which is a large antelope, they have unique patterns on their flanks. Again, it's stripes, but they have a unique pattern on their flanks and on their face. So that would be another way of identifying them. The same thing is done with humpback whales. The most important part of the body there for identifying individuals is the fluke pattern, the underside of the fluke, the tail fluke. So when humpbacks dive down, they tend to lift their fluke up out of the water, and that's time to get a shot. And you're then looking at the shape of the fluke, whether it's got bites out of it. Is it primarily dark? Is it primarily light? Are there circles, scratches, all these kinds of things? So it really does depend what kind of photography you're doing. You're probably not so involved in the individual identification, but just for interest's sake, really, more than anything else, that's an area where photography is used in wildlife management and conservation. So have a think about shots that you particularly liked and places you can go for inspiration. A lot of the wildlife sites have really lovely still photographs. Some wildlife photographers have really great shots on their website. You can go on Instagram, just do a search on a hashtag for, for example, dolphins might be one, and then you get a whole load of different dolphin photographs. So there's lots of places where you can get examples of photographs. And a good place to go, or a great place to look, is for people who've taken photographs in the area where you're planning to go, because that gives you some idea of what's possible. Other things to think about with the image itself are composition. So I've already mentioned, are you doing close-ups? Are you doing more of a contextual shot? So what sort of composition do you need to think about? And that, again, will take you back to the lens that you need to use, the sort of lighting that's ideal for that kind of shot. Are you going to be shooting it, or will the end result be color or black and white? So I always shoot my photographs in color, and I shoot raw and the biggest file I can get. And the reason I do that is that a big file gives me a lot of flexibility. It means I can crop different areas, so I can recompose it in post-processing if I want to. Because often, taking the example of a humpback whale breaching, for example, as an example, that's over in a couple of seconds, 2 to 3 seconds, and it's all done. So obviously, there is not any real time to think about the composition other than to set the kind of zoom that you want. So that would be, I use a 100-400mm zoom lens when I'm photographing humpbacks. So I'm kind of guessing where the whale is most likely to come out of the water. So that will set my how big or how small that whale will be in the frame. I normally err on the side of small because I can always crop in later and get in a bit tighter. What's in the background? If there are cliffs behind, then maybe I'll set my depth of field so that they're slightly out of focus. So there's all these things. So you can do some of it ahead of the animal showing up, and you just anticipate that you're going to get a breach. Doesn't always happen, but at least you're ready for it. And you've taken steps to get the kind of composition in the shot that you want. But by having a big image, it means I can crop and it gives me flexibility. It also means that if I'm going to print that image, so for example, a photograph that I'm selling, I want to get the highest resolution in my original shot that I can. There are things I do in post-processing to bring it up to the right standard, the right print standard to be used on the with the printer that I use, and that's all museum quality prints. But you need to really stack everything in your favor. Now, I did read somebody recently, another photographer, saying that they saw no reason to have really big images, but I would dispute that. But it does depend on what you're doing. For example, if you're only planning to use the images for social media, for Instagram, Pinterest, or something like that, then you don't need a high resolution image at all. You can shoot in JPEG, not RAW, so that also compresses the file down. But just be aware it does limit what you can do in post afterwards. So if you've got a RAW file, you can at least change the lighting, color saturation, that kind of thing, and you've got there's a lot of fine tuning you can do. Whereas if you shoot in JPEG, you're much more limited in what you can do. So do think about how you want to use these images. And a photo book might be another example. And there, again, I would err on the side of having a larger file because that makes sure you've got a nice high resolution, so you can do a full page image in the photo book. So these are the kind of things to think about, and they're just recommendations for when you're putting your file together. Of course, the other thing with composition is where you're going to put your subject in your frame. Ideally, not smack in the middle because that's pretty boring. So think about rule of thirds. Think about leading lines. Think about, I've already mentioned depth of field. So what's in focus, what isn't. You can create some very atmospheric pictures of ordinary animals, actually, if you've got a very narrow depth of field and the background is very out of focus, because then, remember that out of focus area creates a level of atmosphere in the shot, but it always directs the viewer's eye back to your subject. So think about how you're going to use all of that. And of course, all of those things take you back to which lens you're going to use, what shutter speed you need, what aperture do you need to get the depth of field. And obviously, shutter, you're going to freeze the action with the whale, or you might want a really blurry whale. It's all good, whatever you're doing. But do think about the final result that you're trying to produce. The only other the other thing I have before I kind of just talk again about lenses is just think about how you're going to get to the animal, because that's another consideration. So if you're on a boat whale watching, it probably doesn't matter what you're carrying. You might want to take, waterproofs or, maybe a spray cover for your camera, that kind of thing. If, however, you've got to hike a distance to see the animal, then that does mean that you're probably, most likely, going to have to carry the gear with you. So think about how much it weighs, and that you'll be carrying other things like water, maybe a snack, that sort of stuff, maybe waterproof clothing. So these kind of things are just things to consider, and that leads you on to things like backpacks. How quickly can you get to your camera if you need to take a shot quickly? I generally like to carry my camera, and I'll use a long strap, but I don't hang it around my neck. I put it one arm through the loop and have the other part of the loop around my neck, so the strap is diagonally across my body, because that I find is just more comfortable. It puts the camera off to one side, and I'm less likely to bump it against things, or it's less likely to swing away from my body and hit something. So think about comfort, because you don't want to get there absolutely exhausted. And when I was photographing gorillas in Uganda, we hiked for a few hours to get to the gorillas. And unfortunately, I'd hurt my back a few weeks earlier. And I've got to tell you, when I got to take the photographs of gorillas, I would have paid good money for a comfy armchair just for 10 minutes, rather than be crouching down and balancing and being aware of what the animals were doing, and also aware of the pain in my back while I was trying to do all of that. So have a think about how you're getting to where you've got to go, and again, pack accordingly. If you are somewhere that's close to home, you may find that for things like some animals, it's good to have access to a hide if that's at a place where animals will regularly congregate. You can always look for what clues there are around. So there might be runs in through the grass where an animal will generally go. They'll tend to mark these little trails. So if you're on the lookout for those, that will give you some idea. But you need to know when they're likely to be around. And as I've already covered, think about the amount of light and what that means for the kind of photograph that you're going to come back with. So there's a few things to think about. The last thing I'm just going to mention is the kind of lens that you use. So I've already mentioned that for shooting humpback whales, I was using 100-400mm zoom. That is my go-to lens. I use it for almost all of my wildlife photography. The only difference to that is I have a wide-angle zoom, and I'll use that to get these more kind of contextual shots. So it's the animal or animals in their environment. And sometimes I might just want to convey what that looks like. Other times I'll have the animal very small in the picture, and most of it is the environment, so it's making a statement about the size. So I've done that with elephants, for example. We tend to think of them as quite large animals, but if you do a big wide angle shot of an animal in its environment, it can look pretty small, and that can also create or tell a different story to having a close-up, which is the other way I like to go. So My preference, I love doing close-ups of animals, which means I'm generally trying to get a nice focus on one of their eyes. So ideally that is well lit, but often it's really hard to get that shot because they will tend to keep their eyes shaded where they can for obvious reasons. So there's sometimes a little bit of patience involved and often quite a lot of frustration involved when it they don't quite get into the position that I'm hoping for. The other one to think about, if you're able to get close to the animal, so I don't know what you're photographing, but if you shoot insects or little animals like that, quite often you can get really close. So you might want to think about a macro lens. So you can do that really close focus, and you can get some really amazing shots with a close focus and very narrow depth of field. So things like that. Okay, so that is it for this podcast. I hope there's been some useful things in that for you. And I'll look forward to speaking to you again at the next podcast. So bye for now. Oh, and one thing just before you go, please take a look at the 2026 wildlife calendar. That's available now. It's on the website. There's a link below the description of this podcast episode. So please take a look, and I'll speak to you next time. Bye now.